Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to those of you who are joining this webinar live and those who will be watching the rebroadcast whenever you watch it. Tonight, we're honored to have with us Father Leo Lefebure, a priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago. He was ordained in 1978 and served in parish ministry on the west side of Chicago, taught at Mundelein Seminary, at Fordham University, and since 2005 has been professor of Theology and Religious Studies at Georgetown University in Washington. He's one of our leading authorities in our country on interreligious relations. Among the books he has written are The Buddha and Christ, True and Holy, Christian Scriptures and Other Religions, Revelation, Religions and Violence, particularly apt topic these days, and most recently, Transforming Interreligious Relations, Catholic Responses to Religious Pluralism. And that includes a chapter on Native American spirituality and American Indians and Jesus, which is sort of the focus of tonight's presentation. He's had an interest in Native American spirituality for many decades now. His list of books and articles and conference presentations is truly amazing. Ran some 54 pages. And the only thing that I could find about Father Leo that wasn't impressive about his life and career is that on LinkedIn, he only has 165 followers. And that's not all that great. Want to let you know that he's graciously agreed to hang around for another 10 or 15 minutes after his presentation to answer your questions and comment on your comments. And when the webinar starts, there'll be a little icon at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A. If you will write your question or your comment in, and that will be retrieved by our moderators and presented to Father Leo at the conclusion. So with great honor, we're privileged to have Father Leo to talk about the Native American Catholic experience.
Thank you very much. The experience of Native communities in North America in the Catholic Church is a tale of both tragedy and grace. The unbearably sad account of the repeated outrageous mistreatment of Native Americans by European Catholics over many centuries has often been told and is by now well known. What is remarkable is that out of harsh conflicts, brutal injustice, negative prejudgments, and bitter misunderstandings, there has emerged a Native Catholic community in North America marked by faith, hope, and love. When European Catholics first encountered the indigenous peoples of North America, they often did everything possible to displace the established religious traditions and replace them with European-style Catholic faith and practice. From the 16th and 17th centuries until the 1960s, frequently Catholic missioners respected certain aspects of Native American culture, but often they distrusted the indigenous religious traditions, sometimes even interpreting them as, quote, an ensemble of demonic beliefs and practices. The Jesuit priest, Father Joseph Lafiteau, who worked in Eastern Canada in the 18th century, appreciated and valued much of Native American culture. He viewed their religion as what he called a decadent descendant of the original religion given to our first parents before their fall from grace. So the model of Catholic missionaries was often to displace the North American indigenous religious traditions and then accept only on a very limited scale what they could accommodate in the Catholic tradition. The negative theological evaluation of Native American religions was frequently combined with the cultural belief in America's so-called manifest destiny. And so many people believed that European American culture was intended by God to dominate North America. Native Americans who resisted this were often judged very negatively on both religious and cultural grounds. So Native Americans responded in various ways. Some rejected Christianity altogether as a white man's religion. Others accepted Christianity, including the Catholic faith, in a European American form and abandoned their traditional American Indian practices. These people sometimes have been very strongly opposed to any synthesis of Christian and native symbols. There's also a third option. Some accept Catholic faith and also remain rooted in their indigenous traditions. And it's this third option that I would like to focus primarily on today. There have been various ways in which Catholics have incorporated various native practices into Catholic life. In 1883, a Catholic priest, Father Francis M. Kraft, who was partly of Mohawk descent, opened the ceremonies of the Sundance at the Rosebud Reservation with a prayer. He reportedly wore eagle feathers and participated as fully as possible in the ceremonies. Father Kraft compared the Sundance and the Eucharist, launching a tradition that would stress the similarity between Catholic and Lakota practices. A number of Lakota Catholics, including Frank Fools Crow, Gilbert Badwound, and Lucy Looks Twice, have interpreted the Sundance as a Christian ceremony in which the dancers come close to God by imitating Christ's sufferings. The Lakota Catholic conferences in the 20th century celebrated the Eucharist beneath a Sundance pole. And a number of Catholic priests in the late 19th and early 20th centuries allowed Indians to light their sacred pipes during the Eucharist. One of the most famous American Indians to combine Catholic faith and native practice was Nicholas Black Elk. Born about 1863 into a family of medicine people in Dakota Territory in present-day Wyoming, Black Elk received a powerful vision when he was just 9 years old. The Franciscan sister Marie-Therese Archambault, Lakota-born, a member of the Teton Sioux who was raised on the Standing Rock and Rosebud reservations in South Dakota, has studied the life and teachings of Black Elk intensively. And she describes this event when he's only 9 years old. He lost consciousness for 12 days. During this 12-day coma-like period, a great vision of cosmic completion and fullness of his Lakota world flooded his soul. In it were the powers and directions of the earth and sky, the powerful Wakinyan, that is, the thunder and lightning spirits of the West, the grandfathers of the Lakota cosmos, the powerful horses of the four directions, the morning star, animal and herb spirits, all spoke to him. He was never the same again, and the spirit world's choice of him marked his life to his dying day. Later, he became a leader in the ghost dances, and many dances received a vision when he held up the red flowering stick. Black Elk himself later looked back on this time in his life. He said, "I was the leader in every dance. Soon I had developed so much power that even if I would stand in the center of the circle and wave this red stick, the people would fall in swoons without dancing and see their visions." In 1904, Black Elk entered the Catholic Church, being baptized by Father Joseph Lindebner of the Jesuit order, and he received the Christian name Nicholas. However, he did not entirely relinquish his earlier spiritual path. For many years, he served as a Catholic catechist, but he brought traditional perspectives and practices into the Catholic faith. In 1923, he celebrated the Catholic feast of Corpus Christi by dressing in traditional costume and leading a sacred dance to honor the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. As a Catholic, Black Elk compared the sufferings in the Sundance to the Passion of Christ. In bringing together different traditions, there can be mutual transformation. So Black Elk interpreted the incarnation of God in Jesus Christ in relation to the manifestation of God in white buffalo cow woman among American Indians. According to Black Elk's daughter, Lucy Looks Twice, the German Jesuit missioner Eugene Beuchel taught that the Blessed Virgin Mary was the figure who brought the sacred pipe, thus identifying her with the white buffalo woman. And Lucy Looks Twice comments, that was what we always thought. In 1929, Black Elk related accounts of his life and Indian practices to John Neihart, and this account was published in 1932 with the title Black Elk Speaks. The publication caused controversy, since many of the Jesuits didn't know he was still continuing the native practices, and they were somewhat shocked by this. Then in 1933, Black Elk was injured by a wagon and team of horses and asked for the last rites of the Catholic Church. Upon recovering, he signed documents that appeared to pull back from Black Elk Speaks, and he claimed that John Neihart had omitted Black Elk's comments on his Catholic faith. But he continued to do both, the Catholic life and the rights of the Lakota people. Sister Marie-Therese Archambault comments that Black Elk was able to transfer his understanding of the Wakan, the sacred, the incomprehensible, from his Lakota religion to what it meant in biblical terms. Black Elk interpreted Paul's famous hymn of charity in 1 Corinthians 13 in light of his native experience, even though there's no exact word in Lakota that corresponds exactly to the Greek word agape, love. Black Elk resonated with Paul's boasting only of his weakness in his second letter to the Corinthians. And Black Elk spoke of communicating with the sacred by sending a pitiful voice. Sister Marie-Therese Archambault notes that Black Elk's prayer always accentuates his own existential weakness and that of human beings who are ushika, that is, in a miserable state of being, either spiritually or materially. So all of this resonates with Paul's writings, especially in 2 Corinthians. So Sister Marie-Therese Archambault notes that he's really practicing both religious traditions wholeheartedly. He gave himself to both and lived them fully. Not a contradiction or a paradox, this, but the blessing of the sacred direction of East in Black Elk's life. At its heart, it was the gifted intuition that all being is one. So Black Elk poses a challenge to interpreters, and there has been controversy over what to make of his experience. Christopher Vexey, who's a noted scholar of American Indian Catholic experience and history, comments that Black Elk interpreted some of his Catholicism through the Lakota worldview, thinking, for example, of retreats as if they were vision quests. On the other hand, his interviews with Neihart betrayed a Christian universalism, a peaceful moralism that seemed to have reinterpreted Lakota traditions through Christian consciousness. Vexey concludes that Black Elk was a creative theologian who was able to understand the two religious traditions in terms of the other. Another scholar who's investigated this issue, Damian Costello, stresses the moment of integration in the two paths. He writes, for Black Elk, Lakota tradition and Catholicism were not the two disparate systems that some other scholars have thought. Rather, as Ben Black Bear argued, they composed one way of looking at the world. Costello cites the work of a noted Jesuit scholar, Walter Ong, on orality and literacy, and comments that in oral cultures, originality does not come from completely new systems of knowledge, but by incorporating new ideas into the established framework of knowledge. So the old formulas and themes are made to interact with new and complicated situations, but the formulas and themes are reshuffled rather than supplanted with new materials. So Damien Costello concludes that Black Elk applied the dynamics of Lakota tradition to his understanding of Christian thought. And Sister Marie-Therese Archambault, who's really very profoundly studied Black Elk, she again sees him as both a practicing Lakota religious teacher and a Catholic catechist, commenting, perhaps he was unable to totally abandon the truth and universality of either his Lakota way or his Catholic convictions, even though their expressions of this truth at times seemed contradictory. Or perhaps his philosophy was a synthesis of both that transcended these contradictions. This we will never know for sure, she concludes. But this example of Black Elk was very important for Sister Marie-Therese in her own journey. So thinking about herself, she comments, in maturing, I've learned that the truth for me lies in the union of the Lakota ways and the Catholic faith. I write from that uncomfortable place where millions of the globe's inhabitants are thrust now with no secure home, no freedom to live according to their cultural heritage, end quote. Now, some have found Black Elk's journey puzzling, but in the year 2017, the Diocese of Rapid City, South Dakota, formally proposed Nicholas Black Elk for canonization. The Catholic Church has officially designated him as a servant of God, and the cause of his canonization is right now being investigated. Sister Marie-Therese also tells us about how American Indian Catholic women are retrieving traditional myths, stories, and rituals for the rite of passage of a girl into womanhood. She notes especially the influence of the white buffalo calf story, which Nicholas Black Elk told to Joseph E. Browns in 1947, which exists in many different variations. And this is very influential for many American Indian women today. The white buffalo calf woman brings the sacred pipe and life-giving instructions to people who have asked God for help. The story has deeply touched contemporary Native American women and moved them to take action in their lives. Sister Marie-Therese expresses the hope that the white buffalo calf woman goes further and points to a society that lives in respect on the earth, with a balance between men and women, in awareness of one God as the source of life, who nourishes our deepest hungers, even those we do not know. Ben Blackbear Jr., also a member of the Lakota Nation and a Catholic deacon, shared his experience of Catholic and Lakota spirituality with Sister Marie-Therese. He recalled that his mother's ancestors had become Catholic in the 1850s and 60s, during the time of the noted Jesuit missioner, Father Pierre-Jean de Smet, and described the town of his childhood, Ironwood, as both traditional Lakota and also overwhelmingly Catholic. So Ben Blackbear recalled this early Catholic activity was tied into traditional Lakota ways. And Uncle was a medicine man and described his experience. So the sense of spirituality that I had sort of meshed traditional Lakota spirituality with Christian Catholic spirituality. It helped me to see Catholicism in Lakota, and then a lot of the traditional teachings and beliefs that I learned in Lakota became a part of me. His father was a Catholic who continued to participate in traditional Lakota ceremonies, and Ben Blackbear speculated that Catholic missionaries who rejected the traditional ceremonies did not really understand them. And so Sister Marie-Therese reflects on Blackbear's experience, finding an analogy between societies established by Catholic missionaries and the traditional Lakota practice of communicating with the spirit world. She comments, crucial in this context, the societies were a means of being in and communicating with the spirit world, of which dreams and visions were the main communication. This is important to note because the matrix of all Lakota spiritual leanings and aspirations was through encounters with the spirit world, through dreams and visions during ceremonies. So traditionally, there was often a lot of suspicion of Native religious and cultural practices. In recent decades, the Catholic Church has gone through a profound reassessment of its relationship to other religions and to non-European cultures. The Second Vatican Council expressed respect for the truth and holiness found in other religions, and also for all cultures. The Council declared that the Catholic Church is not committed to any one culture. The Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, declared that the Catholic Church, quote, learned early in its history to express the Christian message in the concepts and language of different peoples, and said further, the Church profits from the riches hidden in various cultures. Also very important for our relationship with American Indians, the Second Vatican Council publicly acknowledged, for the first time in history really, that Catholics have often failed in their responsibilities towards members of other religions and cultures. And the Council warned about the danger of traditional cultures being threatened by the increasing global exchanges between cultures. So this reassessment set the stage for new developments in the Catholic Church's relationship to Native Americans. In 1987, Pope John Paul II visited the United States, and he addressed a very, very strong message to Native American Catholics. I quote, I encourage you as Native people to preserve and keep alive your cultures, your languages, the values and customs which have served you well in the past and which provide a solid foundation for the future. Your encounter with the gospel has not only enriched you, it has enriched the church. We are well aware that this has not taken place without its difficulties and occasionally its blunders. However, the gospel does not destroy what is best in you. On the contrary, it enriches spiritual qualities and gifts that are distinctive of your cultures. All consciences must be challenged. There are real injustices to be addressed and biased attitudes to be challenged, end quote. Pope John Paul II then went on to make another very bold statement saying that not only is Christianity relevant to the Indian peoples, but Christ in the members of his body is himself Indian. So it's a very strong identification with Christ in the mystical body with the Indian experience. Then following the lead of the Second Vatican Council and of Pope John Paul II, the Catholic bishops of the United States publicly admitted the profoundly ambiguous character of the original encounters between Catholics and Native Americans, including acknowledging the tragedies. They write, we acknowledge that the encounter with the Europeans was often a harsh and painful one for Native peoples, and we lament the diseases, death, destruction, injustices, and disrespect for Native ways and traditions which came with it. We recognize that often European Christians failed to distinguish between what was crucial to the gospel and what were matters of cultural preference. That failure brought with it catastrophic consequences for the Native peoples who were at times forced to become European at the same time they became Christian. So the Catholic bishops strongly affirm that Native American Catholics are called to be both true Catholic believers and authentic Native Americans. Far from being incompatible, the bishops go on, these two traditions, the Catholic way and the native way, enrich each other and the whole church. Then between 1994 and 2001, the ad hoc committee on Native American Catholics of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops asked different dioceses about the lives of their native population. And they asked in particular about the degree to which Native American Catholics incorporate traditional rituals and symbols into their prayer life. 51 dioceses responded. And it was common to include traditional rituals and symbols in prayers, usually more on reservations and rural areas, less so in the cities. In the cities, there would be a diversity of different indigenous nations, and it would be more difficult to find common symbols or rituals that could be used representing native culture and religious tradition. In some areas, native symbols were used only on special occasions, and in others, they were a regular feature of Catholic prayer. Among the practices that some areas incorporated into Catholic prayer were smudging, blessing, purifying with cedar, sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco. In some cases, eagle feathers were used in blessings. Dance and drums were used in liturgies. Indian music was often used. An Indian naming ceremony was sometimes used in conjunction with baptism. Some dressed in native attire in local and diocesan celebrations. Some practiced the sweat lodge. Some practiced the medicine wheel. Sacred vessels, decorations, and vestments with native designs are sometimes used. And one issue, sometimes controversial, is the use of the sacred pipe. So in recent decades, there's been a wide variety of different experiences and a lot of discernment in practice. An American Jesuit, Father William Stoltzman, chaired the dialogues on the Rosebud reservation of Rosebud medicine men and pastors meeting during a 6-year period of reflection on points of convergence and divergence between the Lakota religion and Christianity, beginning with ritual ceremonies. And he's written about this experience in his book, The Pipe and Christ. Now, Father Stoltzman had personal experiences of being called by the Holy Spirit from the time he was young. And then, as a minister to the Lakota, he made 4 Lakota vision quests under the guidance of Arthur Running Horse, who is both a traditional Lakota medicine man and also a Catholic leader. So on the basis of these experiences, Father Stoltzman compared the Lakota vision quest with the Catholic experience of the Holy Spirit, saying, the Lakota spirits and the Christian Holy Spirit are the immediate, dynamic spiritual elements within the Lakota and Christian religions. These spirits call and empower medicine men and priests. Stoltzman further compared the Hanblesia, literally crying for a dream, which is commonly known as the vision quest, to Catholic retreats and to the sacraments of confirmation and holy orders. He compared the Lakota Uwipi ceremony to the Catholic Mass, while in each case also respectfully noting the differences. So it's not that these are completely the same, but there's points of contact. He comments, the complementarity of these two rituals and religions can be clearly seen in the similar but different attitudes the Lakota and the Christian have toward the sacred foods of these two ceremonies. So based on many years of these discussions, Father Stoltzman notes 4 different responses to this question of the relation between Lakota and Christian religious traditions. First, some see no difference. They stress both traditions pray to the same God. Secondly, some stress the important differences between the two traditions, noting the differences in external practices or the variety of social and religious values. Now, some in the second option are hostile to Christianity and yearn to return to an earlier period that they hope was more idyllic. Third option, another group stresses the similarities and seeks harmony. Of this group, Father Stoltzman comments, regardless of the level of education, they are good people bent on trying to establish harmony between religions. However, in doing so, they often destroy the uniqueness of revelation that gives each religion its strength and place in religious history. Then finally, the fourth option, Father Stoltzman describes as a group who are able to appreciate both the similarities and differences of both religions and keep them in their respective places. Like the pivot of a teeter-totter, these people find fulfillment first in going to one side and then to the other and back again. Thus, the two traditions are always in constant relationship with one another. Now, in the dialogues, leaders of each tradition expressed concern that a combination could lead to the loss of identity of one side or the other. And one of the leaders commented, "We are not here to combine the two religions. We are here to understand one another and to respect one another." And so in this model, the group was seeking an explanation that recognized both similarities and differences. And the analogy they used was, just as two people do not have to be exactly alike to marry, so too two religions, like the Lakota and the Christian religions, need not be made equivalent to be brought into a fruitful relationship. So Stoltzman notes that Lakota Catholics often practice both Lakota and Catholic rituals, while traditional Lakota leaders often are resistant to any incorporation of Catholic elements into traditional rituals. So he points out weaknesses and imperfections in both traditions and suggests that both religions together provide a stronger ladder with which to ascend toward the sacred. So he sees a certain theological legitimacy in this final option, grounded in a Lakota Christian's respect for the unity of God and the progressive distinction of persons in the Trinity, as well as the four sacred powers placed by God in the four directions. So Father Stoltzman concludes with a nuanced defense of entering cautiously into both traditions, saying a person can practice the Lakota religion in a totally Orthodox way and also practice the Catholic faith in a totally Orthodox way, each at its appropriate time, with a faith and interrelationship that encompasses the situation of the individual, bringing blessing from God. Coming back to the same challenge, again, I'll quote Sister Marie-Thérèse Archambault, expresses, in a sense, the core of the situation of the Native Catholic community. She writes, "When we read the gospel, we must read it as Native people, for this is who we are. We can no longer try to be what we think the dominant society wants us to be. We have to go beyond the white gospel in order to perceive its truth. When we do this, we shall meet Jesus as our brother and recognize him as one who has been with us all along, as the quiet servant, the one who has strengthened us through these centuries. Then we will know that the cry of Jesus from the cross was the cry of our people at Wounded Knee, Sand Creek, and other places of the mass death of our people. Jesus was our companion during these years of our invisibility in this society. This same Jesus is the one who challenges us to grow beyond ourselves." She also laments the tragedy of the past and describes the exigency of the current situation. In the past, the church has obscured the face of Christ through ignorance of or outright dismissal of Native cultures. It has attempted to enter the reality of Native people at superficial levels, almost always from the European viewpoint and perspectives. Through this manner of teaching, many Indian people were placed in the profoundly impossible situation of accepting the gospel for their own good on the one hand, while on the other, having to devalue their culture and thus themselves. Now, we must undo this attitude and do all we can to reveal the face of Christ, who goes beyond all cultures. This means we must de-evangelize Native people. So she's calling people to come out of this traditional Catholic attitude of a negative judgment towards Native religion and culture into this new atmosphere. So there's been many debates over what does this actually mean. Some American Indian Catholics have called for the establishment of a new rite of the Catholic Church, analogous to the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, with a distinctive cultural form. Most, however, seem not to support this option. Father Paul Ojibwe was a Franciscan friar of the Atonement from the Ojibwe people of Minnesota. And he commented on this. The vast majority of Catholic Native Americans do not call for a separate life, but only the space and time in which to develop our own ecclesial sense of ourselves that is integrated and grounded both in traditional life and in post-Vatican II theological praxis. And he names the challenge that he sees. We do know that the heart and soul of the Native American has not yet been put into the language and ritual of Christian faith. This is the challenge we bring to the church, to seek out a grammar of ascent together. It is to learn from the vision quest, that journey into the unknown where we meet our angels and devils and find a new purpose, hope, and name. It is to trust the sweat lodge, the kiva, the talking circle, the medicine wheel, all those rites of healing renewal. End quote. So some Native American Catholics celebrate their traditional rituals in one context and also the Catholic sacraments in another context. Frank Fools Crow, who was a nephew of Nicholas Black Elk and one of the most respected Lakota holy men of his time, became a Roman Catholic in June 1917 while continuing to practice Lakota rituals. And he commented many years later in interviews in the 1970s saying, I'm still a practicing Roman Catholic. I go to Mass and I receive Holy Communion whenever I can. At the same time, we live according to the traditional religious beliefs and customs of our people, and we find few problems with the differences between the two. For him, the greatest problem was the earlier harsh Catholic condemnations of Lakota practices, but he acknowledged that this had changed. Some of the things the new faith said were hard to take, especially their belief that we did not know the true God and that Sioux medicine and ceremonies were things of the devil. So we rejected these positions until their positions began to change. And he looked back to his uncle Black Elk as a model for this. Traditionally, in the southwest of the United States, many of the Spanish Franciscan missionaries allowed much of the Pueblo religion to continue alongside of Catholic practices. So this model resulted in a type of compartmentalization, which continues in some Catholic Yaqui communities today. Muriel Thayer Painter describes the Yaqui patterns. Some of the native concepts have been integrated into the Catholic way, some have been reinterpreted, some remain untouched. All are intertwined, and it's difficult, often impossible, to separate them. Most of the people see no inconsistencies in their expression of religion. So many native Catholics celebrate the Catholic ceremonies and sacraments, and then they also continue to perform the traditional rituals of their own people. Now, there's also a question, is it legitimate ever to incorporate native symbols into Catholic worship? And there's a big debate here. Among the Lakota, there was a whole process of discernment. After the Second Vatican Council, some European American priests began using native symbols like the sacred pipe and assumed that this was good for the people without fully consulting the Lakota themselves. And this tended to continue an older pattern of paternalism where non-native Catholic missionaries were making the major decisions. So this was very controversial. Some Lakota liked this, others Lakota were very opposed to it. So the bishop at that time of Rapid City, South Dakota, was Bishop Charles Chaput, who's of the Potawatomi people. And he established a task force for his diocese of 25 Lakota people with 3 priests who had professional expertise as advisors, but the priests were not to tell them what to do. They were not to dictate conclusions. So the Lakota Catholics studied Lakota culture and tradition in relation to Catholic theology and worship, and they went through a process of discerning what aspects of Lakota tradition were in accord with Catholic practice, and they reflected on Lakota philosophy and theology with a view to developing an authentic Lakota form of Catholic faith. They then made recommendations concerning the use of the drum and the sacred pipe, the sage incense blessing, and traditional songs. Now, some of this, again, concerning the sacred pipe in particular, were highly controversial. The task force stressed only Lakota persons should use their traditional symbols and rituals. Only Lakota persons should lead Lakota ceremonies. And they proposed that in each local community, the Lakota themselves would decide which traditional symbols and rites would be incorporated into Catholic worship services, and public notice would be given beforehand so that those who opposed this would have the choice not to attend. And they insisted they were not proposing the creation of a new Lakota rite. So this is an ongoing discernment with a spectrum of views looking at these questions. So many Native American Catholics have found that this fundamental affirmation of their identity by Pope John Paul II was a very important moment of coming to a sense of their value in the Catholic Church, precisely as Native American Catholics. Alfreda Anton very eloquently expressed the spirit and hope of Native American Catholics to Pope John Paul II during his visit to Phoenix, Arizona. She said to him, "We choose not only to survive, but to live fully. We want to live in harmony with all people and all creation. We choose to keep alive for all generations the ways of living carved in the stones and bones of our ancestors. We are open to share and receive whatever is good for the life of the human family with all people of goodwill. As Catholic natives, we have come to know Jesus as the Son of God who loves us and lives with us. The Holy Spirit works in many ways through our people." And often the most powerful expressions come in ritual. In 1984, a Catholic deacon who is also a medicine man in the Ojibwe tradition, Dominic Eshkakagon, performed a sweetgrass ceremony for Pope John Paul II at the Shrine of the Canadian Martyrs, at the same spot where the Huron mission of the 17th century had been established. Deacon Eshkakagon described this as one of the greatest experiences of my native spirituality. I felt real acceptance of my traditions by the Church, personified by the Pope. I thank you for your attention.